Thank you for the invitation. I'm going to talk about the child outcomes of mothers' employment using as an example of how longitudinal data can be used, and certainly only one example. Longitudinal data, as you all know, follows people over the life course, and the particular life course transitions this talk is concerned with are the transitions for a woman, what happens to her employment when she becomes a mother, and for children, what happens to their development if in their early years their mother had paid work. And over the period that I'm going to be looking at, there has been, you probably don't need me to tell you, huge changes in the experience of motherhood in this country. Having a job as well as a child has become the norm rather than the exception. And one of many ways of illustrating this is that if we look at children born in 1970, half of them didn't have a mother in paid work until the child was 5. But when we look at children born in the millennium, half of them already had mothers with paid work by the time they were 1. A number of societal changes have permitted this transformation, such as the extension of maternity leave to more people and for a longer time, but also that most mothers achieve this compromise between paid work and parenthood by working part-time, and they still do that. Fathers' employment is not going to feature in the research I'm going to tell you today, but it is becoming increasingly something which does adapt to parenthood as well as mothers. So I apologise to enthusiastic, hands-on, stay-at-home fathers for not bringing them into the picture. I just want to mention that they are beginning to enter it. The question about how did the children fare whose mothers stayed at home or went out to work when they were young is addressed in a series of 7 studies, not just the 2 that the chairman just mentioned, and not all done by me and my colleagues, but I've put them together in order to illustrate how the changing context of mothers' employment is reflected in the changing experience of children. The various authors who've provided this material are listed at the end, but what we see on this slide is a summary of the studies I've looked at. Down the left-hand side, and using the invisible pointer, which you can't see, are the dates of birth of the children in this series of studies, starting with the 1970 birth cohort, one of the national birth cohorts, otherwise known as BCS 70, and ending with children born in 2000 to 2001 in the Millennium cohort study. And in between, we've got evidence from 2 other major longitudinal resources in this country, the British Household Panel Study, which provides where there is an analysis providing evidence on people born during the 1970s, and ALSPAC, the Avon longitudinal study of children born in the Bristol area in 1991 and 2. And interleaved in the series, there are 2 second-generation studies from the National Birth Cohort Studies. These are subsamples of the main birth cohort studies of the children of female survey members, the women in the studies who'd had children themselves early enough for the children to be old enough to be analysed and assessed either in 1991, which is the second generation of BCS, or in the year 2004, when we have assessments on children of the BCS 70 cohort. The third column on the graph says the ages of the child when the mother's employment was observed, and they vary from study to study, but they're all early up to school age. And the outcomes, which is the ages of the child when the outcomes were recorded, are shown in the next column down. For the first two cohorts, these outcomes are after they've left school, and we've got an assessment of their entire academic records. And as we come down the page, the children tend to be younger at assessment, and the two Millennium Cohort study exercises use outcomes measured when the children were 5 in the year 2006. The colour coding is to show you that at the top of the slide, for the earlier births, the outcomes summarised in the results column do find some negative association between child outcomes and maternal employment. But by the time we come to the bottom of the slide, the blue coding means we didn't find anything either way, no significant association. To summarise again, what that slide shows is that as mothers' employment went up, the estimates of adverse outcomes, shown, I hope you'll agree, appropriately in amber, have diminished to statistical insignificance, which is shown in blue. The adverse effects, where we have them, were more likely to be associated with full-time work than part-time work, and they were more likely to be reflected, if there were any, in verbal, cognitive or academic scores than in behavioural adjustment, which was also assessed in all the studies onwards from the second generation of NCDS. Now, of course, there are lots of other factors affecting the relationship. These estimates have controlled for factors which might explain both why the mother is working and how well the child is doing, but nevertheless there are factors listed on this slide which would affect whether there was going to be a problem between individuals and over time. How much maternity and paternity leave was available and taken, what childcare was available, what its quality was, what its cost was, how much fathers are involved in hands-on parenting of young children, how much flexibility there is in employment contracts for parents, for employers allowing parents to adjust their employment behaviour to fit in with their dual roles. What the quality of the job is will make a difference. If it's very stressful, it's less likely to be beneficial to the child than if it isn't. And it's also going to be more beneficial to the child if the job offers good pay and good career prospects. The mother's mental health is a factor which enters the equation in a complicated way. Stressful jobs are not very good for mothers, and they're not very good for the children. The social expectations have changed apace, and the more society is tolerant or approving of working mothers, the more successful is the whole enterprise likely to be. I've turned the wrong one on. So this research has relevance to policies, and all of the pieces of research in the table can or should have been used in the construction of a new regime as far as policies for flexible employment and shared parenting, which is now on the government agenda. And I'd also say that as an aside, that this collection of research projects show how useful for society it is for there to be a collection of longitudinal research resources. But the problems of the issue of working parents' work has not yet been entirely solved. As I said, the government is still working on developing a new look for maternity leave, turning it into shared parenting leave. The quality of childcare is still a burning issue. And I would actually like to take issue with the headline on the front page of The Independent. I didn't say that there was no evidence of harm to children. I would say there was no evidence of harm in general, and that parents do and still do take care to make sure that they avoid harming their children. This is my penultimate slide, which gives recognition to the fact that this is a societal enterprise. I thank the funders of our longitudinal studies. I thank the informants who've given all this information to so many longitudinal studies. I thank Harriet Harman MP and the Smith Institute, who inspired the original piece of research which is mentioned in your booklet. And I'm also indebted to the other authors of the 6 studies that I put on the slide. And here are the details for those of you who would like to take a note.